Most of the writing and research about gender-based disparities in autism focuses on the fact that girls are woefully underdiagnosed. Researchers, therapists, and some autistic self-advocates talk about female autism, pointing to the fact that among girls, autistic qualities do seem less severe or less obvious on average. When autistic girls engage in self-stimulatory behavior, it tends to be less physically damaging, less arm biting, more hair twirling, or opening and closing a book quietly many times. When autistic girls are shy and withdrawn, people are less concerned by it than they would be if a boy exhibited the same reticence. On the flip side, when autistic girls have meltdowns, it tends to get written off as an emotional outburst. When they do act out or behave aggressively, they're more likely to be severely punished for not being ladylike, resulting in them learning to censor their aggression at an earlier age than most boys do. Adults speak to young girls using more emotion-related words than they do when speaking to boys, which means autistic girls often get a leg up in social and relational skills. Much of the play that girls stereotypically engage in and are encouraged to engage in involves mimicking adult social interactions, such as playing house or pretending to run a store. As a result, many autistic girls learn how to fake their way through routine conversations at a younger age than boys do. For these and a variety of other reasons, autistic girls are assessed at older ages. Before I began my journey in understanding high-masking autism and how it might present in a late-diagnosed female, I didn't know anything about any of this. I didn't even know that, as this book references, I just read from Dr. Price's Unmasking Autism book, which I highly recommend. I didn't even know that there was some sort of previously called Asperger's for girls, Asper girls, as Rudy Simone has talked about. There was some kind of like trait list. I didn't even know it. I also didn't know that a large percentage of those who are autistic identify as transgender and or gender nonconforming, that there's a significant overlap in the LGBTQ plus community. I didn't know that girls weren't studied. I didn't know that autism looked anything except for what it was described to look like in the DSM. And that began my journey, this book. And so while this list might be written off as too broad, as commonly female, and certainly anyone can identify with these qualities, I do believe that within this list, even though it is previously, I guess, supposed to be a tool, that there is something about particularly late diagnosed women that might resonate with these traits. And I wanted to share it with you. So this list should not be used as a diagnostic tool, but I do believe that informing ourselves, like this became the jumping off point for me to really dive into watching autistic creators, looking for research, trying to get books. And by the way, there aren't that many, especially when it comes to women and high masking in any population. This book really helps begin that journey. And so I didn't, even though the book talks about these clinicians would fall back on this traits list and that the traits list in some ways might be too broad, but also informative, I didn't even know it existed. And so this video is for anyone who wants to learn more about what has been described as, even though it's a trait list that might seem broad in some ways, there seems to be some meat in many of these points that then can push you into seeking more research and data for yourself. The last thing I want to say is I know that there's this conversation about it being a trend. If you look at the historical nature of everything, when we learn more about something and understand it, more people seem to relate to it. That's true about being left-handed. It's true about complex trauma. To me, the list goes on and on. But if you are someone who wants to learn more and understand the core, and or even a clinician, and you're like, well, I don't know, I can't recommend this book enough, and I can't begin to tell you that these things can really resonate potentially for your clients or patients who you suspect something else is going on, and the complex trauma, the borderline, the ADHD, which are often misdiagnosed and or missed and or comorbid with autistic traits in women, might be an important place to start. So let's get into it. So the traits commonly associated are broken up into emotional, psychological, behavioral, and social categories. Let's start with emotional. Here we go. Strikes others as emotionally immature and sensitive, prone to outbursts or crying jags, sometimes over seemingly small things. Has trouble recognizing or naming one's feelings, ignores or suppresses emotions until they bubble up and explode, may become disturbed or overwhelmed when others are upset, but may be uncertain how to respond or support them, goes blank and seems to shut down after prolonged socializing or when overstimulated. The next category is psychological. Reports a high degree of anxiety, especially social anxiety. Is perceived by others as moody and prone to bouts of depression. May have been diagnosed with mood disorders such as bipolar or PDs such as borderline or narcissistic PD before autism was discovered. Fears rejection intensely and tries to manage how other people feel to avoid it. Has an unstable sense of self, perhaps highly dependent upon the opinions of others. The next category is behavioral. Uses control to manage stress. Follows intense self-imposed rules despite having an otherwise unconventional personality. Is usually happiest at home or in a familiar, predictable environment. Seems youthful for their age in looks, in dress, behavior, or interests. Neglects physical health until it becomes impossible to ignore. Prone to excessive exercise, calorie control, and or other disordered behaviors. Self-soothes by constantly fidgeting, listening to repetitive music, I would add watching the same shows again and again, twirling hair, picking skin or cuticles, etc. Social, the last category, is a social chameleon, adopts mannerisms and interests of the groups they're in. May be highly self-educated, but will have struggled with social aspects of college or their career. Can be very shy or mute. Can become also very outspoken when discussing a subject they are passionate about. Struggles to know when to speak in large groups or at parties. Does not initiate conversations but can appear outgoing and comfortable when approached. Can socialize but primarily in shallow, superficial ways that may seem like a performance. Struggles to form deeper friendships. Has trouble disappointing or disagreeing with someone during a real-time conversation. The last thing I'll say is that what I read in the beginning about us being socialized and also exposed to more emotional language and practicing social behaviors as children who are labeled with the expectation to be nurturers and caregivers is the concept of masking. And I'm going to make a video about that alone. What really is high masking? It's really about compensatory strategies and behaviors, things to compensate for difficulties and to accommodate things you struggle with without ideally them being perceived, and camouflaging, doing things to fit in, to use your skill set with autistic behaviors and traits to not show the differences, to learn to engage in ways that make it more acceptable. And the problem with all of this is alongside just the core research issues, even harder to identify in us. That's why I think we're at the very beginning when it comes to, as I've said, every population outside of the most researched population, which happens to be white males. The last thing I'll say is this. It says in this part, there's a particular way this neurotype tends to present among people who only discovered the identity of autism late in life. We tend to be emotionally withdrawn, yet friendly and socially adaptive. We're social chameleons and masters at making people like us, but we never let much of our real selves show. We erect rigid rules around our lives to manage stress and make an unpredictable social world feel a little less scary. Make eye contact for this many seconds. Eat this easy-to-prepare meal at this time of day. Never talk about yourself for too long. Try as we might to be agreeable, people still comment on how oversensitive or immature we are, or they imply that we're hard to read. When we struggle, people talk down to us or try to socially mother us into more normative behavior. This video is late, I know. I'm furiously making videos to provide them for my Eggshell Parents course, and so I hope to see you soon. Take good care and stay safe. Thanks for being here. Bye.